An average African girl can cook. That's my granddaughter there. She cooks. Here, this is a blessed country. You can run out and buy food anywhere. We don't have that privilege of any fast food, so you're bound to cook.
Frequently, no one's paying attention to the cooks. It's just something that happens. And it's a large measure of history. It's a large measure of cultural history. It's certainly equally a large measure of cultural retention. And it, like other things that are traditional, is dying out. So it's like, okay, what can we do about preserving a little bit of it? What can we do about at least making people aware of it, or even aware of the need to preserve it, or aware of the need to even think about it?
Come, let's film you. No.
I learned just by watching what she was doing, imitating. I can't cook as well as she can, but you learn by imitation in a way. That's how you traditionally learn in Nigeria. All the girls that learn how to cook learn by watching their grandmothers or their mothers cooking. So learn their secrets by watching what they're doing. How my mother cooks is not how my grandmother cooks. It's definitely different. My grandmother, I mean, her recipes are, I guess, would be more traditional. It's more involved in some ways than American cooking. The recipes change a lot because you improvise a lot more because you're not learning from a recipe book. My mother has improvised ever since she got here, and are the foods like what's available here than what's available in Nigeria. Like things you can't get here, you improvise on. I don't eat as much Nigerian food as I did when I was younger, but I still wouldn't give it up. You know what I mean? Like that's part of how I grew up. That's what I am.
In several of the Western African languages, yam, as in N-Y-A-M, yam, means to eat. So that among the Gullah you get food for yam, which you also get in Jamaica. Yam is a verb. So you've got, yam is powerful. This one is, and this one is?
Sweet potato.
And why is this one? How many of you think this is a yam? All y'all timid folks out there. How many of y'all think this is a yam? How many of y'all think this is a yam?
The second. I think the second.
Y'all both wrong. These are both sweet potatoes. I don't care what they tell you they are, and this one is labeled a yam. They are sweet potatoes. I mean, the bottom line is a yam is something completely different. If you have never seen a yam, you wouldn't know. Okay? A yam is a large, hairy tuber that can be any color on the inside from white to basically mauve, almost purple. Okay? They are more in texture and consistency like white potatoes or Irish potatoes. And it's a completely different thing. Okay? The sweet potato is from the Americas, as is the potato, I might add. And the yam is from, there are people who say Africa, there are people who say China, but there are certainly archaeological backgrounds that indicate that there was not only a grain crucible using millet in Africa, but also a yam crucible in Western Africa. So it's a very old thing in Western Africa if it's not indigenous. There are yam festivals. New yams grow from old yams, which are sprouted, and so it's sort of resurrection and continuity and Certainly in Ghana, there are yam festivals. In Mali, legend has it that murderers were beheaded in yam fields so that their blood would fertilize the fields. There are yam festivals in Nigeria, and in fact, one of the Yoruba Orisha, Oshala, as he's called in Brazil, or Obatala, as he's called in Cuba, is noted for his love of pounded white yam, which is called yan. In Bahia, they replicate a Nigerian yam feast, and they have a variation, if you will, on the Yoruba Orisha, who is known as Oshagiyan, Oshala, who eats yam. Ghana, Nigeria, that area that was formerly known, for obvious reasons, as the Slave Coast. If you move north, you've got a rice culture. And there is an indigenous rice, which I can mispronounce for you horribly in Latin, which is Oryza glaberrina. And it is a wet rice that is indigenous to Africa. And obviously, the slave traders and the planters knew a whole lot more about African civilizations than most Americans do at the end of the 20th century, and so they knew exactly where to go to find folks who knew what to do with that stuff that they had they couldn't figure out what to do with. So all of South Carolina's rice culture is based on an African task system.
And I think at the time, if you step back and you take the position of a slave owner, I mean, slaves were expensive. They were an investment. And the best way you can make your investment productive is to ensure that, in this case, these enslaved humans, you ensure that they eat these sorts of foods that they are used to. You ensure that they are healthy. And the best way to do is to ensure that you provide them with the sorts of foods that are either high in carbohydrates, but they are the foods that they are previously used to eating.
Two things that most African Americans who are trying to eat traditionally out of their southern general origins will try to eat at least some of, one being hoppin' black-eyed peas and rice, the other being collard greens. The saying being, and it gets confused and it depends on who's telling the tale, but the one I grew up with was collard greens for fold and money, for obvious reasons, and peas and rice for luck. Hoppin' John for luck. So you want both on New Year's Day.
Here at Savannah's, the Hoppin' John is made with black-eyed peas, long grain rice, and a ham hock or bacon, as I use today, and a little bit of salt. And you boil it till the rice is tender and the beans are tender. And then you serve it over some collard greens, which originated in the South. The Hoppin' John itself, the black-eyed peas and the rice, were traditionally an African dish for a nice dinner or a lunch or every meal.
But it's that Senegalese connection again. It's those rice-growing people who ate rice who ended up in the Carolinas, because Hoppin' John is basically a dish that comes from the Carolina Low Country. So when you start looking at the cooking of the African side of the Low Country, you find a lot of retentions, like these rice dishes, like the use of okra, like some of the totemic things, and like some of the terminology, the whole use of the word nyam, as in to eat.
Rice, as we know it, the Asian variety of rice was first domesticated in Asia, but then by the time enslaved Americans are coming here, it has become part of the food culture in Eastern Africa, including Madagascar.
Those composed rice dishes, peas and, okay, things of that sort, you find throughout certainly the Caribbean, but you find also several of them in western parts of Africa, okay, because the rice, certainly the rice that we have in the United States for the most part, came that way, okay. We find those composed rice dishes. You'll find all of those purlus in the Carolinas, okay. You'll find Hoppin' John. You also find Limpin' Susan. Limpin' Susan is a rice and okra mix, okay? You find certainly the peas and rice, the Rio Pois Rouge, one of my favorites in terms of names in Cuba, Moros y Cristianos, the Christians and the Moors, black beans, white rice.
By the time of the enslavement of Africans, beginning from the late 15th onwards, many of these foods are in fact African in the sense they have become totally part of the African food culture. And so as they are coming to the Americas, they are coming as African foods.
Everything comes and goes. Think corn in Africa. Think chilies in Africa. But originally, or? No, think that's going that way. Think watermelon over here coming this way. So I mean, A and B, it's going back and forth across the Atlantic.
But in terms of origins, though, tomato is a new world.
Tomato is New World, black-eyed peas are Old World, but you get them on the other side. Corn is New World, okra is Old World African, but you get them on the other side.
But then talking about some of the influences that have moved back and forth, in fact, soul food finds its way back to Africa, and this time it is a kind of food that's being taken there by returning Africans.
Sure, I hadn't thought of that.
The founding of nations like Liberia
and Sierra Leone as well.
Sierra Leone. These, in fact, what the African American community that eventually settles there creates a community unto themselves, and they use that to spread, I think, the African American culture back to the continent.
Akra, you don't make it often. It's a little more complicated. It's a little more. It takes more time consuming for just this tiny little bread-like appetizer. When she makes it, it's kind of like because I don't know why my mother doesn't make it, but my grandmother does. And one time she only makes it. I don't know how. It comes out like perfect. You know, she has like her little secret to like ingredients. I don't know what she's doing. It's more, like you take time out for someone, it's for someone else, like they like it. She knows I love it, so second time she makes it, it's like, oh, this makes you feel a little more special in a way, you know what I mean? So I don't know. My grandmother definitely, because I was the first in the family, the first child in the family, so that's why when I came in, she's like, oh, this is my grandma, this is my daughter, my granddaughter, like. She's I don't know, she's a little proud of me because I've gone and done so much more than, I've gotten this far. I can go out and do it by myself and cook by myself, that kind of stuff. So anytime she makes it, it's kind of like a treat, you know what I mean? Like a reward.
This is what we use for peanut soup. If I want to go the traditional way, I will first of all roast the peanut, then blend it to a fine paste, or use stone, grind it on stone to a very fine paste. But here, we use this, what do you call it? Peanut butter, or without sugar.
We call these yams because we couldn't get the yams we knew. Okay. And because we couldn't get the yams we knew, we baptized the next best thing. Sweet potatoes are New World vegetables. They are New World tubers. Yams are Old World tubers. There's a whole lot of discussion as to whether yams originated in China or in Africa, but they are Old World tubers.
Back home, most of our meals, like asaro, is cooked with palm oil. But recently, very recently, the world is getting anxious or being aware of cholesterol, whatever you call it, in palm oil. So we're dropping palm oil, but to get that red color, we use this.
The red pepper?
Instead of the palm oil.
I think dishes evolve. One of the things that we have with this whole notion of the collard greens taking the whole ham hock is it probably wasn't a whole ham hock to start with. Dishes have evolved certainly in African American food with affluence. What was probably a tiny seasoning piece of pork, smoked pork of some sort, as people were more able to put more animal protein in the pot, became the ham hock, or the half of last night's ham, or the whatever. And so the dishes have changed. So if it goes back to being the small seasoning piece of pork, or for even many people as it evolves even further, the chicken wing, smoked, or the smoked turkey wing, it still has a cultural validity. It may not be the absolute tradition, but it's still within the traditional sort of focus.
If you go to the American South, for instance, you have some kinds of soul foods which are clearly African, which are considered traditional soul food, but there are clearly things like collard greens. They're not African in origin at all, and yet they become an integral part of African American eating.
When I'm experimenting, you know, like the curry Hoppin' John, the curry chicken Hoppin' John with a mango chutney. So I like curry chicken. It's a very Indian dish. And I was over in Little India, and I ate at this restaurant. I had curry chicken there. And I was like thinking, you know, this would be really good on a Hoppin' John. Throw a little mango chutney on there maybe, you know, just experimenting and see how things taste together. And if, you know, and the curry chicken Hoppin' John is one of our popular items. People love the curry chicken Hoppin' John.
Who I am is at some point, if not nightly, evident on my plate. It works for everybody. Whether it's spaghetti bolognese, which has become a cliche, but it's not a cliche if it's what your grandmother fed you. It's part of who you are. You know, it's kielbasa and pierogi. It's, you know, vatapá if you're Brazilian. It's whatever it is, but that's a part of me on that plate, and I'm not giving that up.